Hello and welcome back. Today we will be looking at inmates sent to the gallows, who they are and what they did. But first, let's do a brief summary of capital punishment in the UK. Capital punishment, of course, predates the formation of the UK. It was used around the world in ancient times, but it was used frequently, as you can imagine, especially through the reign of Henry VIII. As many as 72,000 people are estimated to have been sentenced to capital punishment, and if you know any history about Henry VIII, you know what his favourite method was. Historically in the UK, the death penalty applied for treason, murder, manslaughter, arson, theft of goods worth more than a shilling, and highway robbery. The gallows was the method used for all, apart from treason, which was punished by drawing, hanging and quartering for men and burning for women. The last execution in the United Kingdom took place in 1964, and capital punishment for murder was suspended in 1965 until it was finally abolished in 1969. It was 1973 that it was abolished in Northern Ireland. Although it was unused, the death penalty remained a legally defined punishment for offences like treason until it was completely abolished in 1998. An estimated 35,000 death sentences were handed out in England and Wales. 7,000 of these inmates received their punishment. There remained a working gallows at Wandsworth Prison in London until 1994, and they would test the gallows every 6 months until 1992. But now we have gone through a brief history of capital punishment in the UK, I think we should start off with the last ever inmates to receive capital punishment. So let's get straight into the cases. And first we start off with the last person to receive capital punishment in Wales. His name was Vivian Teed. He was one of 9 children and was brought up in Swansea. During the Second World War, he was evacuated to a country village. He then served in the Royal Air Force but was discharged for going absent without leave. He was in a relationship with a woman named Beryl Doyle. He had 2 prior convictions for violent offences and he was unemployed. He dotted from job to job but had little money. So on the night of the 15th of November 1957, Teed broke into a post office where he had previously done some construction work. He wanted to rob it. He was wearing women's silk stockings over his hands to avoid leaving fingerprints. He wasn't expecting anyone to be in the building, but he encountered 73-year-old postmaster William Williams, who asked him what he was doing there. In a panic, he attacked William very violently. He took his life. He left the post office without anything. He then went to the local inn, where he bragged about what he had just done to a man at the pub named Ronald Williams. Teed said, "I've done that post office job. I hit the man. I couldn't find the safe keys and he was coming too, so I left him and didn't take anything." At that time, he wasn't believed. The problem was Teed was known as a liar. The next morning, William's body was discovered by a post office employee, Margaret John. The police were called and they soon investigated the crime scene. They discovered Teed's footprints at the scene along with one of the stockings he had used to conceal his fingerprints. The weapon that he used to attack Williams was traced back to a toolbox belonging to his father. Teed was arrested 3 days after the crime. Police found stains on Williams' clothes and shoes that linked to Teed, and then he confessed. His trial took place in March 1958. Some of the witnesses that were included were scientists who testified as to the forensic evidence against Teed, including the stains found on Williams' shoes and clothes, as well as the weapon used being linked back to Teed's father. Another person who testified was a prison officer who stated that Teed had confessed to him while on remand. Teed's defence was that he was suffering from abnormality of the mind which impaired his mental responsibility. The jury actually took a long time to decide, and twice they failed to reach a verdict. But on the third occasion, Teed was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Teed was also deemed sane by the Home Office psychiatrist, who was sent to assess his condition. His appeal was rejected a month after his conviction. Only a dozen people and 2 policemen were standing outside the gates of Swansea prison. He received his capital punishment at 9 a.m. on Tuesday the 6th of May 1958. His executioner was Robert Leslie Stewart. Next we move on to the last ever person to receive capital punishment in Scotland. His name was Henry John Burnett, and he was born on the 5th of January 1954. There isn't much to say about his life because when he eventually received capital punishment, he was only 21 years old. He worked at John R. Stephen Fish Curies, where he met a new lady. This lady was Margaret May. She married her husband, Thomas Guyan, on the 2nd of February 1957, and they later moved into their first floor flat at 14 Jackson Terrace in Aberdeen. Their son was born in September 1958, and they had a second child in February 1961. However, the father of this second child was not her husband, Thomas. This led to serious troubles in their marriage, which came to a head in 1962 when Margaret consulted a solicitor about the possibility of divorce. Her husband Thomas refused this. She then joined the Fish Curies in December of that same year, where she met Henry Burnett. Their relationship soon developed, and by May 1963, Margaret had moved out of the Jackson Terrace home and moved in with Henry Burnett with her younger son Keith. This relationship soon broke down. Burnett came to believe that given any chance, Margaret would leave him or go back to her husband, so he locked her in the house whenever he went out. Margaret did want to leave him because of how toxic the relationship had got. By chance, she met her estranged husband Thomas on the 31st of May, and she agreed to go back to him. Margaret arrived at the home she shared with Henry Burnett and her young son Keith at 4 p.m. to collect her son. Her friend Georgina went with her for moral support. As soon as Margaret announced her intention to go back to her husband Thomas, Burnett cried, "Margaret, Margaret, you are not going to leave me." He then drew a weapon to her throat and closed the door behind them. Georgina banged repeatedly on the front door demanding the release of Margaret. Minutes later, he threw open the door and ran off down the street. Margaret was unharmed. The 2 women made their way back to 14 Jackson Terrace, the place that she was now going to live again with her husband Thomas. Burnett went to his brother Frank and told him what happened. His brother told him he had to go to the police, but Burnett was in a rage. He was angry and he wanted revenge. Instead, he went to his brother's house and borrowed his firearm. He got on a bus with this firearm with all his rage and made his way to 14 Jackson Terrace. He arrived at Thomas Guyan and Margaret's flat and forced his way in. Georgina screamed, "You can't come in here." Thomas Guyan, Margaret's husband, jumped up to see what was happening. As he opened the kitchen door, he was met by Henry Burnett, who then used a firearm to take his life. Burnett then took Margaret out of the flat, using a firearm to persuade her. On the way down the stairs, he threatened a young boy from a neighbouring flat. He dragged Margaret down a lane and as far as a garage on Seaforth Road, which is near the main route north out of Aberdeen. John Iveen was at this garage filling his car with petrol when Burnett demanded his car. John tried to stop Burnett from stealing the car but was threatened with the firearm. The police were notified of the theft of the car and began following Henry Burnett down the road. They drove for about 15 miles until Burnett pulled over near the town of Elon and offered no resistance as he was arrested by the police. He was charged with the murder of Thomas Guyan. At his trial, His defense was at the time of the crime he was insane, or this was a case of diminished responsibility, but his defenses failed. The jury had considered the evidence for around 25 minutes. The court also heard expert witness evidence from 3 psychiatrists. All of them agreed that Burnett should be reprieved on psychiatric grounds. In letters sent to the local newspaper, The Scotsman, Miller and Lowett, who were the 2 psychiatrists, explained that their evidence suggested that he displayed psychopathic tendencies for which he had received treatment in hospital in the past. They also told the court that he had been violent in the past and had also attempted to take his own life. The expert psychiatric evidence that was presented by his defence in court was reported to have been mocked by the press and the Crown. The law at the time was murder with the use of a firearm was by law a capital offence in order to prevent criminals from deeds like armed robbery. Henry Burnett had gone to his brother's home, Frank's, and broken the firearm cabinet to retrieve the weapon. His defence said his use of the weapon better fitted an impulsive crime of passion than a crime motivated by the intentions that capital punishment was supposed to stop. His mother and father both appeared in the witness box, and his mother completely broke down in court. Despite this evidence and this defence, he was sentenced to death. His own family and the family of Thomas Guyan petitioned for his mercy. However, Henry Burnett never appealed. He was sent to the gallows at 21 years old at 8 a.m. on Thursday the 15th of August 1963. His executioner was Harry Allen, and this happened at Craig Inch's prison. He was placed in an unmarked grave within the walls of the prison. Craig Inch's prison closed in January 2014, and in early August 2014, he was taken from the prison and placed in Aberdeen Crematorium, where a private ceremony was held on the 7th of August. Next is Northern Ireland. Just to say again, Northern Ireland's capital punishment was abolished at a different time to the rest of the UK, a little later on the 25th of July 1973. But now we look at the last person to receive capital punishment in Northern Ireland. His name was Robert McGladdery. He was 25 years old and he was unemployed. He lived with his mother. His mother described him as violently self-abusive and paranoid. He had a record of SA against young women, and he also had a conviction for attacking a man. On the other end, Pearl Gamble was a young shop girl. She lived at home with her parents and her 3 sisters. She was a normal young lady. She would often go to discos and dances with her friends. But unfortunately, her last dance she attended was on the 27th of January 1961 in Orange Hall in Newry. Pearl went to the dance with a few friends. McGladdery also went to this dance with his friend Will Copeland. They had been drinking for a long while. Witnesses said that Pearl had danced with McGladdery twice that night. Premeditated, he was aware that Pearl would get a lift home from the dance and would be dropped at the upper Dalmolly crossroads. McGladdery stole a bicycle and cycled to the crossroads, where he waited for her to be dropped off. Moments after Pearl got out of the car, McGladdery attacked her. He dragged her through a field and then took her life. A man was walking his dog and found Pearl's ripped clothes scattered across fields. A search party was then created. Police were informed. People who attended the dance and other witnesses were then brought into the police station. McGladdery's description of what he was wearing that night and what time he left the dance didn't match with the other witnesses who were called into the police station. McGladdery insisted that he was wearing a dark blue suit and left the dance at 1:50 a.m, but other witnesses said he left the dance at around 1:30 a.m. wearing a light-coloured suit. While searching for Pearl, police found a light-coloured waistcoat and overcoat inside a pillowcase hidden in a septic tank not far from when the crime happened. Pearl was then found. McGladdery was charged with the murder of Pearl Gamble. At his trial, he said he was innocent. He implicated his friend Will Copeland by saying he had loaned Copeland clothes similar to those found in the septic tank, but the jury found McGladdery guilty. When asked if he had anything to say, he faced the Lord Justice and said, "Well, my lord, there are a lot of things that I could say, but I don't think it would make any difference now. But I would say one thing, there is no man in this court that can say I killed Pearl Gamble, because I didn't. I am innocent of that crime. That is all I have to say." More than 150 petitions were sent to the Cabinet Office for his mercy, but they were all declined. He received his capital punishment on the morning of the 20th of December 1961. He had spoken to his mother the night before. Before going to the gallows, he confessed to Chaplain Reverend J. Vance that he had taken the life of Pearl Gamble. Around 30 people gathered outside Crumlin Road Jail. He was aged 26. His executioner was Harry Allen. Gwynne Evans and Peter Allen are who we look at next. They are the last people to receive capital punishment in England. But first, let's start with Gwynne Owen Evans, who was born John Robson Walby on the 1st of April 1940. He left school at 15. He then worked as a page boy at a hotel, and then worked as an engine cleaner for British Railways. He had periods of unemployment throughout his life. He was given a supervision order in 1957, and later that same year he enlisted in the Border Regiment, but was discharged in March 1958 as unfit under existing standards. He enlisted again in November 1958 and was discharged in February 1959 for the same reason. He then started to use the name Owen Evans and worked briefly for British Railways before again trying the armed forces. The Royal Air Force accepted him in July 1959 but discharged him after 4 months as he was physically unfit for the Air Force service. In September 1960, he worked briefly for Lakeland Laundry and became friends with a delivery driver known as Jack West. He then left Lakeland Laundry and moved to Birmingham in October 1961 and there worked as a kitchen porter, driver and lift attendant. On the 5th of April 1963, he was convicted of larceny of a small amount of cash and a railway ticket by false pretences. He was fined and had 4 days detentions in default. He had stolen 2.5 crowns from a friend while he was distracted, and he obtained a loan from a police station by claiming to have lost his wallet at his mother's funeral. In the following few months, Evans was given 3 months imprisonment at Dudley for driving a motor vehicle without a licence and using a driving licence with the intent to deceive. He enlisted again in October 1963 but was discharged on November 1963, the same year, when his criminal convictions and failure to disclose them came to light. He then moved to Preston, where he met Peter Allen and Peter Allen's wife. He began renting a room from the married couple. Peter Allen was born on the 4th of April 1943. He left school at age 15. He had 2 jobs, but within a month lost them and was dismissed for carelessness. He then found employment as a pipe cleaner, and on the 10th of July 1958 he enlisted as a junior gunner in the Junior Leaders Regiment of the Royal Artillery. He served for 11 months before being discharged on the 13th of June 1959 as no longer required, but was given a good reference. For 2 years after leaving the army, Allen worked for 2 trucking companies, but he was dismissed in October 1961 when he was given a promotion and was said to have been unable to handle the responsibility. While he was working as a lorry driver, Allen received his first criminal conviction for aiding and abetting the taking of a car in August 1960. He was given a conditional discharge. On the 11th of November 1961, Allen married Mary, who worked at a cinema. Later that month he found employment at a scrap dealer but was dismissed in 1962 for poor timekeeping. He worked at a dairy farm for 6 months and then moved to Preston in April 63. He found a job as a labourer, but after 2 months he injured his back and was unable to work. He was not dismissed until January 1964. It's around this time that then he met Evans. They both had a similar background in life. They were unemployed or went from job to job, so they had barely any money. So they decided to commit crimes together. On the 21st of January 1964, Evans and Allen removed lead flashing from an empty house. On the 28th of January, the two broke open a cigarette machine and stole the contents. They stole a car and a van and used them in robberies on other houses. They attempted to cover up the van's registration number, but they didn't do it very well, and this led to their arrest and they were fined £10. They then decided that they would go to Jack West and rob him. Jack West, previously mentioned, was Evans' friend. On 6 p.m. on Monday the 6th of April 1964, Jack West returned home. He lived by himself. At about 3 a.m. in the morning, his next door neighbour was awoken by a noise in Jack's house. They looked out the window and saw a car disappearing down the street. The neighbour called the police. They found Jack West with his life taken. In his house, the police found a raincoat, and in the pocket of this coat was a medallion and an army memo form. The medallion was inscribed G.O. Evans, July 1961, and the memo form had the name Miss Norma O'Brien, with an address in Liverpool. Liverpool police traced Norma O'Brien as the address. She was a 17-year-old Liverpool factory worker who told the police that in the autumn of 1963, while staying with her sister and brother-in-law in Preston, she had met a man called Ginger Owen Evans. She told police that she had seen Evans wearing that medallion. She was driven up to Kendal to identify the medallion. Evans and Allen had stolen a car, a black 1959 Ford Prefect, to go to Jack West's house and later abandoned it in a builder's yard. Evans then asked a neighbour whether he could leave it there, and the neighbour thought his behaviour was suspicious, so she reported it to the police on the evening of Tuesday the 7th of April. The police found that the car had been stolen and matched the descriptions given in the crime. The police turned up at Allen's address. Because of the crimes that they had both committed together, Allen was taken to the police station. Evans was taken to the police station a few days later when he was found down one of the streets. Evans was told he was arrested on suspicion of murder, and he admitted that together with Allen and Allen's wife and 2 children, they had gone to borrow money from Jack West. Evans said Allen was the one who took Jack West's life. Allen stood by the claim that him and his wife had nothing to do with it until he found out that his wife was in custody. He said that Evans had suggested robbing West and had initially gone into Jack West's house on his own. Evans then let Allen in, hoping that Jack would not notice, but Jack had come downstairs, so Allen had to fight him. He said that Evans had given him the weapon in which to use to attack Jack West. Evans said that he told Allen he was going to see his friend Jack West because he needed money and he was going to ask him for a loan. However, on the night, Allen forced his way into Jack West's house with the intent of robbery, and that Allen had been the only one to attack Jack. During the interview, Evans said that he knew nothing about a weapon and he didn't have one. The unfortunate thing for Evans is that until that point the police had never revealed what weapon had been used in the crime. Evans also admitted to stealing Jack West's watch. Mrs. Allen's statement supported her husband, that Evans had come out to invite him in. She reported that she had asked the 2 men what had happened in the house and that Evans had said both had attacked Jack West. At 1:15 a.m. on Thursday the 9th of April, less than 48 hours after the crime, both Evans and Allen were charged with the murder. At their trial, Mrs. Allen was called in for her husband's defence. She stuck to her statement that Evans had let Allen into Jack's house and that both men had been responsible for attacking him. She also testified that Evans threw the weapon out of their car window. She also said that Evans made remarks referring to taking the life of Jack West. In cross-examination, she accepted that Evans had been more than a lodger to her. Evans' defence even produced affectionate letters which she had written to Evans while he was in Durham prison. The tone of these letters and their communications changed when she found out that Evans was blaming her husband solely for taking Jack's life. The judge told the jury to treat her evidence with caution because of this. The jury found both men guilty and they were sentenced to death. On the 10th of August, the Home Office sent out letters announcing that the Secretary of State had failed to discover any sufficient ground to justify him in advising Her Majesty to interfere with the due course of the law in both cases. Gwynne Owen Evans was sent to the gallows by executioner Harry Allen at Manchester Strangeways Prison at 8 a.m. on the 13th of August 1964. At the same time, Peter Allen was sent to the gallows at Liverpool's Walton Prison. He was executed by Robert Leslie Stewart. Now we've done the last people to receive capital punishment in the UK, let's move on to some other cases. We look at James Smith, who was born in Edinburgh in 1936. He was a 26-year-old father of two. He worked at a rubber moulder and earned £15 a week, which wasn't enough to survive. Him and his family lived within poverty, so he decided that he was going to rob a shop. On Friday the 4th of May 1962, he entered a sweet shop which was owned by Sarah Cross in Manchester. He used glass screw-top bottles of orangeade and cherryade to attack her and took her life. He then took £6 from the till and made his way out the back door of the sweet shop. Because of the attack, glass was left all over the floor, as well as orangeade and cherryade and money. Sarah Cross was found behind the counter in her sweet shop with her life taken. Police were called and forensic experts surveyed the scene. They discovered Smith's fingerprint on a door frame. This door frame had only just been painted 2 days earlier by Sarah's husband. Smith's fingerprints were already on the police's file because of a previous conviction. He was arrested at his home. The glass found at the crime scene was sent to a laboratory in Preston. The forensic experts then rebuilt these bottles. At the same time, the police searched Smith's home. They found parts of glass. These were also sent to the forensic experts. These glass pieces recovered from his home fitted perfectly into the bottles. He was charged with murder. He went on trial on the 15th of October 1962 and this trial lasted 3 days, but it took the jury just 20 minutes to find Smith guilty of murder. This verdict automatically resulted in him being sentenced to death because at the time, taking someone's life in the course of theft or robbery was a capital offence. He was sent to the gallows on the 28th of November 1962 at Strangeways Prison. His executioner was Harry Allen. All remains of those sent to the gallows were exhumed in 1991 and 1993. They were cremated and the ashes were put in plots at Blackley Cemetery in Manchester. Now we move on to Dorothea Waddingham, who was born near a church in Nottingham. She is referred to as Nurse Waddingham because she took the lives of 2 people that she looked after in a nursing home that she ran near Nottingham in England. Yet she was not a qualified nurse. The only training she had received was as a war maid at an infirmary near Burton-on-Trent. In 1925, she married Thomas Leach. He was twice her age and was suffering from illnesses. During this marriage, she served 2 prison terms for fraud and for theft. They had 3 children. Leach passed away in 1933, but by this point she was already seeing another man named Ronald Sullivan. Sullivan had fought in World War I and had been awarded a military medal. Although they never married, they had 2 children. Whilst the pair lived together, she began to take in elderly and infirm patients at her house at 32 Devon Drive and turned her house into a nursing home. Mrs. Blagg was the Secretary of County Nursing Association and approved of Waddingham's work. She arranged for Mrs. Louisa Bagley, who was 88, and her daughter Ada, who had multiple sclerosis, to become patients. Records show that in 1935, another patient named Mrs. Kemp passed away from an illness that required medicine. This quantity of medicine remained in the nursing home after Mrs. Kemp had passed away. Ada Bagley made a will leaving her estate of $1,600 in trust for her mother after she passed away, with the rest to be divided between 2 cousins, Lawrence Bagley and Fred Gilbert, after her mother passed away. This will was destroyed by Ada in May 1935, and she drew up a new will, which left all the money to Dorothea and her partner, Ronald Sullivan, when Ada and her mother both passed away. Louisa passed away in the 2nd week of May. On the 10th of September 1935, Ada had her family friend visit, Alice Briggs. They spent the afternoon chatting and laughing. Briggs told Waddingham that she would have Ada over her house for tea in the next couple of days. The next day, Sullivan, Dorothea Waddingham's partner, advised H&H Mansfield that his patient Ada was in a coma. The doctor came and found that Ada had passed away. This was expected, so the doctor didn't think anything was suspicious. Ada's wishes were to be cremated, but for this to happen, 2 doctors were required to sign the death certificate, which could only be done after the family of the person who had passed away were notified. Ada had noted in her will a request not to notify her relatives, and Waddingham told the doctors there were no other relatives, which was a clear lie. Cyril Banks was in charge of cremations, but he also worked as a medical officer for the Health of Nottingham. Cyril Banks never thought highly of Waddingham's nursing home and knew there was no state registered nurse on staff as there should have been. He became suspicious at the note from Ada that authorised the cremation and ordered a post-mortem. This led to a deep analysis of Ada. They found traces of a substance over 3 grains in her stomach. Her mother, Louisa, was then exhumed, and the same thing was found. Waddingham and Sullivan were then arrested and charged with 2 murders. Waddingham's trial started on the 4th of February 1936. At the trial, it was revealed that Waddingham claimed that Dr. Mansfield gave her the tablets for Ada, but the doctor denied this. Sullivan was discharged for insufficient evidence, which I actually think he did get away with murder, because the note from Ada regarding her cremation was actually written by Sullivan. The motive at the trial was made clear that it was to do with money and having the estate. Waddingham was charged with murder on the 27th of February. There was a recommendation of mercy due to her being a mother of several young children. At the time of her trial, and at the time she was sent to the gallows, she was still feeding her 3-month-old baby. This happened on the 16th of April 1936 at Winson Green Prison, and her executioner was Thomas Pierpoint. Now is the case of Edwin Bush. He was born to an English mother and an Asian father. At the age of 12, he was taken into care. His living conditions and the way he was brought up, they were horrendous. Because of this, and going into care throughout his whole life, he ended up living in the slums of Honor Oak in southeast London and used crime to get money. On March 3rd, 1961, Elsie Batten, who was 59 years old and a shop assistant in an antique shop near Charing Cross Road in London, was found with her life taken. The weapon used was an antique dagger and an ornamental dress sword had been stolen. She was discovered by the shop owner Louisa May, who helped detectives try out new technology. This new technology was Identikit. This used a standard set of facial features to help a witness build a picture of a suspect. He helped create the image based off a suspicious man who had gone into the shop just 2 days before the crime. He was admiring the sword, which was stolen. Another witness also told police that they had seen a man and his blonde girlfriend try to sell a sword the same day as the crime. The Identikit was printed and given to local newspapers as well as given to local police stations. On March 16th, Bush and his 17-year-old blonde girlfriend Janet were in central London. They had just sold the ornamental dress sword. They walked up Old Compton Street. Policeman Arthur Cole spotted the couple looking into a shop window and recognised Bush from the images. 20-year-old Bush was arrested and interviewed. He claimed his innocence, but there was evidence against him. His palm print was found on the dagger used, and his fingerprints on the sword, as well as a shoe print at the scene of the crime, matched the shoes he was wearing when he was arrested. He was then picked out in an identity parade by a man whom he had attempted to sell the sword. He then told the police this: "I am sorry, I done it. I don't know what came over me. Speaking personally, the world is better off without me." He insisted that his girlfriend had nothing to do with it. He was charged with murder and he stood trial at the Old Bailey in May 1961. He claimed his attack on Elsie was motivated solely by her making slurs towards him as they haggled over the price. He was sentenced to death on the 12th of May 1961. He was sent to the gallows on the 6th of July 1961 at Pentonville Prison in London. His executioner was Harry Allen. Louisa May Merrifield was born in Wigan. She had various jobs working as a domestic helper and housekeeper. She was fired or forced to leave because of her poor attitude towards work. On the 22nd of August 1950, she married her third husband, 68-year-old Alfred Merrifield. He had left his first wife, Alice Whittle, and had abandoned their 10 children in 1928. On the 12th of March 1953, the couple were employed as housekeeper and handyman, living companions to 79-year-old Sarah Ann Ricketts. Ricketts lived at her bungalow in 339 Devonshire Road in Blackpool. Sarah Ricketts was a widow. Both her 2 husbands had taken their own lives. She was a very small petite lady, being only 4'8", but she was known as a difficult, bitter woman with a very short temper. Sarah Ricketts had a habit of changing her will whenever someone annoyed or upset her, which was pretty often. Almost as soon as the Merrifields started working for Sarah Ricketts, she complained about their lack of care towards her, the shortage of food, their attitudes, and the fact they were spending lots of her money in the local public house. Louisa Merrifield drank a lot. She loved going to the public house. When she was drinking, she also used to brag a lot and sometimes lie. She began to brag that Sarah Ricketts had passed away and left her the bungalow, but Sarah Ricketts was still alive. In March 1953, Louisa Merrifield had spoken to Sarah Ricketts into writing a will that left the bungalow to her. The bungalow was valued at around £3,000 to £4,000. She also wanted the will to include that her husband Alfred Merrifield was not included. She then convinced Sarah Ricketts' GP to clarify that Ricketts was mentally competent to make a new will. Dr. Newell said the reason why she wanted me to go was that the old lady might pass away at any minute with a stroke or a disease, and she wanted to keep herself alright with the relatives. A couple of weeks later, on the 13th of April, Dr. Albert Victor Wood was called out by Merrifield. She stated that Sarah Ricketts was seriously ill. She was diagnosed with mild bronchitis. This doctor later said, "It seems like Mrs. Merrifield was calling me out, as I thought under false pretenses. She again said she was afraid of something happening during the night. Mrs. Merrifield mentioned something about a will. I said I wasn't interested." This call out to the GP later in court was seen to correlate with the idea that she wanted to make sure that when Sarah Ricketts had passed away, it would seem like it was just natural causes. She was elderly, a doctor had been out to see her and she was sick. But this wasn't the truth. Sarah Ricketts ate odd things. She enjoyed eating sweet jams straight from the jar, and she ate them with a spoon. She also used to eat the jams with either rum or a bottle of stout. Louisa Merrifield added a substance to the jams, a poison. She had purchased this substance through a local chemist. On the 12th of April 1953, Merrifield told her friend Jessie Brewer that she had to return home to lay out an old woman. Sarah Ricketts passed away on the evening of the 14th of April, but Merrifield didn't call for a doctor until the next morning. She claimed that Sarah Ricketts was clearly dead. She had not wished to call the doctor out late at night. Merrifield asked the local Salvation Army band to stand outside the bungalow, playing Abide With Me. Merrifield insisted that Sarah was quickly cremated. She also didn't want Sarah Ricketts' family to know of her sudden passing. After seeing that Sarah had passed away in the local newspaper, Louisa Merrifield's friend Jessie Brewer told the police about their conversation. The police quickly ordered a post-mortem. This found that Sarah Ricketts had died of poisoning. The police searched the bungalow and didn't find any substances, but the local chemist said that Louisa Merrifield had recently purchased the substance found within Sarah Ricketts. She was legally required to sign the poison register. The police then arrested both the Merrifields. They were both charged with murder. Their trial began between the 20th and 31st of July 1953. Alfred Merrifield, Louisa's husband, appeared to be very confused at court. He didn't understand what was happening and he was largely deaf, whereas his wife Louisa was very confident that she would get away with it. She actually loved the attention she was receiving at the trial. A lot of the evidence against the Merrifields was circumstantial, but this was made worse by Louisa's bragging when she was drinking in the public house. She used to boast of an inheritance while Sarah was still living. Louisa had called the doctor to verify that Sarah was well enough to sign a new will, and it was her who called the doctors out claiming that she was close to death when she was just unwell. When Louisa accused Sarah Ricketts of bedding her husband Alfred, the judge said, "You are a vulgar and stupid woman with a very dirty mind." Louisa Merrifield was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. This was originally supposed to happen on the 18th of August 1953, but she appealed against her verdict. This was dismissed. She was sent to the gallows on the morning of the 18th of September 1953 at Strangeways Prison in Manchester. She refused to remove her glasses when requested. Her executioner was Pierpoint. She was buried in an unmarked grave within the prison walls of Strangeways. They started to do rebuilding work at the prison, like I said before in other cases, in 1991 and 1993, so they were exhumed. 45 were identified. One of these was Louisa Merrifield. She was sent and cremated at Blackley Crematorium in Manchester. Her husband, Alfred Merrifield, was acquitted. He lived at the bungalow and fought a legal battle with Sarah Ricketts' daughters for a share of its value. He gained 1/6 in 1956. He then lived in a caravan and became a regular attraction at Blackpool's Golden Mile beachfront sideshows billed as the murderess's husband. He always maintained that he was unaware of his wife's activities and told a crime writer that the old bugger would have poisoned him next for his share of the bungalow. He passed away on the 24th of June 1962 at the age of 80. Russell Pascoe was born in 1940. In 1963, he lived with his friend Dennis Whitty and 3 young women in a caravan park in Cornwall. Whitty was a labourer at a gasworks. Pascoe had previously worked as a labourer at Nanjarrow Farm near Falmouth and knew the farmer William Rowe. William Rowe was very reclusive and lived in this huge farmhouse of 4 bedrooms on his own, after his mother and brother had passed away. There was a big local rumour that William Rowe had a large sum of money in the house. He had been the victim of a robbery in 1960 previously. £200 was taken and some other items from the house, but the money wasn't found. Pascoe and Whitty, feeling that they needed some money, decided to go to the farm. On the night of Wednesday the 14th of August 1963, they travelled on Whitty's motorcycle. They were armed with a firearm and other weapons. Whitty was wearing dark jeans and a dark double-breasted blazer with silver buttons. They knocked on William's door at 11 p.m. The old man opened the door and Whitty said that he had crashed his helicopter nearby. His blazer made him look like a pilot. They asked William if they could use his telephone. When they entered the home, they attacked William Rowe. Whitty used the firearm and Pascoe used another weapon. They took William's life. They then searched the house for the sum of money in the rumour, but they came away with only £4, which they found in a piano. Whitty came home with a watch and 2 boxes of matches. Once it was done, they split the money and took £2 each and returned to the caravan. The 3 girls that they lived with said that Whitty was grinning all over his face and that Pascoe was seen wiping something from Whitty's face. The following day, one of the girlfriends confronted Whitty with a copy of the evening newspaper, which contained details of William Rowe having his life taken. She asked Whitty, "You went to Constantine, did you do this?" Whitty replied, "Yes, I did." The 3 girls claimed that both of them threatened to take their lives if they told anyone what they knew, but this didn't stop one of the girls and they told the local police. Pascoe was arrested and claimed that he had been in the caravan at the time of the crime. He then admitted knowing William Rowe and working for him in the past. The police realised that he had worked for William at the time of the robbery in 1960. Whitty was then arrested the next day. He was questioned and told that he was suspected of committing the murder. They both started to blame each other. They were both charged and cautioned. Whitty said to police, "We are both over 21, so I suppose we can hang." They went on trial on the 29th of October. The crime was described as brutal and savage in the extreme. The jury debated for 4.5 hours before returning guilty verdicts for both men. They were sentenced to death. On the 2nd of November 1963, they were driven to separate prisons. Both men appealed, but their appeals were rejected. Russell Pascoe was sent to the gallows at Bristol Prison on the 17th of December at 8 a.m. His executioner was Harry Allen. At the same time, Whitty was sent to the gallows at Winchester Prison. His executioner was Robert Stewart. Now we move on to Margaret Allen. Margaret Allen was a lesbian who dressed in men's clothes and preferred to be called Bill Allen. She was a local bus conductor. On the 29th of August 1948, Allen's elderly neighbour Nancy Chadwick knocked on her door. She was later found with her life taken in the street outside Margaret Allen's house in Manchester. The police suspected Margaret Allen from the start. She was overly talkative with reporters and customers in a local pub, and whenever the subject of the crime was raised. She was also the first to point out that Mrs. Chadwick's shopping bag was floating in the river that ran behind their houses. After drinking a few beers in her local pub, she then started boasting that she was the last person to see the victim alive. She also let everyone know that Mrs. Chadwick had been wearing an underskirt with a hidden pocket sewn into it. She was visited by police on the 1st of September and she confessed, saying, "I was in a funny mood." She was charged with murder. At her trial, she was dressed in men's clothing. It only lasted for 5 hours, with the jury taking just 15 minutes to find her guilty. A petition was raised to try and save her, but there were only 162 signatures on it. She was sent to the gallows at Strangeways Prison on the 12th of January 1949. Her executioner was Albert Pierpoint. Now we move on to Charlotte Bryant, who was born in Londonderry in 1904. She was known to be promiscuous. She met Frederick Bryant in Ireland during the early 1920s. They got married and moved to Somerset. He was 25 and she was 19. They had 5 children, although it's not known how many were fathered by her husband, Frederick. In 1925, they moved to a tied cottage in Overcompton, in Yeovil, after Fred obtained a job as a farm labourer. It's reported that Charlotte Bryant was quite neglectful of her family. She was more interested in other men. Her husband even ignored her when she brought men back to the house to share her bed. One of her lovers was a horse dealer named Leonard Parsons. He started lodging in the Bryant household in 1933. Parsons didn't lodge on a regular basis, only when he was in the area. He sometimes went back to his wife, the mother of his 4 children. Charlotte was absolutely in love with him and decided that she preferred him to her husband. In 1934, her husband Frederick was sacked. There was rumours at the time this was possibly because of the gossip surrounding his wife. They then moved to Dorset. In May 1935, Frederick was taken ill, but he recovered within a few days. He was taken ill again on the 11th of December and recovered. On the 22nd of December, he was taken violently ill and lost his life. Traces of arsenic and weed killer were found in rubbish at the back of the Bryant house, and traces were found on the shelves in the house and in one of Charlotte's coat pockets, as well as in Frederick's system. Charlotte was arrested on the 10th of February 1936 and charged with the murder of her husband. Her trial began on Wednesday the 27th of May 1936. She was unable to follow the proceedings. She was illiterate. She protested that she had been on very good terms with her husband, but a witness, Mr. Tuck, testified that he had met Charlotte returning from the hospital immediately after her husband passed away. Her comment to him, who was an insurance agent, was, "Nobody can say I poisoned him." On the 30th of May 1936, Charlotte Bryant was found guilty and sentenced to death. This happened at Exeter Prison on Wednesday the 15th of July 1936. She was 33 years old and her executioner was Thomas Pierpoint. Our last case is that of Susan Newell. She was from a very poor background. She was married and had a daughter, but her first husband was killed in World War I. By 1923, she had remarried John Newell, who was an ex-serviceman. He was now working as a Glasgow subway worker. They lived in a rented room in Newland Street. John Johnston had left his house on the afternoon of the 20th of June and had not returned. Another boy had met him at 6 p.m. and given him 9 papers to sell. The following day, Newell and her daughter Janet set off on foot with a bundle carried on a go-kart. While walking out of Coatbridge on Glasgow Road, a truck driver offered them a lift. He took them as far as the east end of Glasgow and dropped them off on Duke Street. Locals were suspicious of Newell and the police were called. She was followed as she went into a back court and emerged without the bundle. She was arrested and the boy was discovered. Both her and her husband were arrested. They were both charged with murder. They made no plea and were sent to prison. On the 8th of September 1923, Newell and her husband appeared at the Glasgow Sheriff Court and both pled not guilty, while he also lodged a special defence of an alibi. Newell and her husband were both put on trial, and the case was heard by Lord Alness at the High Court in Glasgow. This began on the 18th of September. There were 70 witnesses cited and 40 gave evidence on the first day of the trial. Her daughter Janet testified against her, describing how the paperboy had been wheeled through the street on a pram. John Newell could prove he was at his brother's funeral at the time of the murder. On the second day of the trial, the charge against her husband was withdrawn. Her defence put forward was a plea of insanity, but this was rejected. The jury returned a verdict of guilty. However, they indicated that they strongly recommended mercy. However, she was sentenced to death, and the date of the execution was set for the 10th of October. A petition was put forth to the Secretary of State for Scotland, as she was a woman and lived in severe poverty. This was declined. On the 10th of October 1923, she was sent to the gallows at Duke Street Prison in Glasgow. There had not been an execution of a woman in Glasgow in 70 years before this. She was the last woman in Scotland to be executed. And that concludes our video today. Obviously this is part 1, and there will be many other videos covering the gallows and the inmates. I'm also considering doing a video of the executioners and their history. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.